All right, welcome to another episode of Not Investment Advice. We've got the NIA boys here today. Me, Master Flex himself, Trung Phan. Follow him on Twitter, Trung T Fan. We got Jack Butcher, founder of Visualize Value. You can also follow him on Twitter if you're not already, at Jack Butcher. And I'm B Zaidi on Twitter, Bilal Zaidi, founder of Creator Lab. We are the NIA boys, and let's go into the week, boys. We talked about, well, it came up last week, but we're going to talk about it this week. Figma acquired Adobe acquired Figma.
Well, if we waited long enough, Figma would have done the reverse.
Exactly. Well, Figma got acquired by Adobe for around $20 billion. We're going to break that down today and get, more importantly, Visualize Value's very own Jack Butcher's opinion on Figma and what makes it special and his take on it. We're going to break that down. And then, secondly, another love fest for Jack, the Porsche IPO.
Jack, did he pronounce that correctly? How's Porsche pronounced?
That's what I was going to ask.
Well, the Brits use Porsche, but I think this is the Adidas debate that we had pre-recording. I think Porsche is the German pronunciation, and really? I'm probably not even giving that the right enunciation in the right spot.
The right oomph?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I thought that was
I'm not going to attempt it because I thought
that was
it's
just
culturally
the American douche version. Like when you be like, I've got the Porsche.
No. There's some. I think that's derived from the actual pronunciation.
But
we got some German listeners. Give us the.
Let them hit us up. So the Porsche IPO will happen later this month. But in addition to that, I'm hitting Bilal with that last second edition.
Here we go.
We'll talk about the day in 2008 when Volkswagen was the most valuable company in the world. It was the craziest short squeeze in finance history, and it involved Porsche and Volkswagen. And let me tease the listeners so you don't turn this podcast off after Figma. The headlines that came out was that Porsche was a hedge fund that happened to make cars on the side. Like, this was how deep they were into the finance game. So we'll tease that out.
2008.
Trung has been in the group chat talking about this for the last 4 days. He's very excited to deliver this.
Yeah, I've sent these guys 30 videos. They're like, dude, we're not going to watch this, man. Just tell us what happened.
We'll get the live Trung version. All right, well, let's save that for the second half. Let's get into Figma, boys. I mean, I don't know what else we want to tee up. It was $20 billion reported. I think there was a mix between stock and cash. I think the market didn't love the deal. If you look at the public stock price,
I'm happy to do some super top line before Bilal crushes Jack with Bilal. I want you to be a Creator Lab style after this. I want you to just hit up Jack and be like, because okay, so listeners, mini detour. I went on Creator Lab last week. I had Bilal hit me up, the one-on-one interview for the uninitiated. Creator Lab is Bilal's side hustle. Podcast. No, that's his main. He's been doing that for ages. But that's when he hits up creators and just gets them talking real passionate about what they're up to. So I can't wait for Bilal to hit up Jack on that front. But let's talk about this deal.
Two. Me and Jack did 2 already. So
this will be like number 3.
We'll do a third. There we go.
So let me talk a little bit of the strategy angle and the financials around Adobe Figma. I imagine a lot of our listeners at this point have heard a lot about the deal. So just quick summary: $20 billion, as Bilal mentioned. Adobe itself is a $150 billion company, so that's a big chunk of its market cap. And I think the best line I've seen about it came from Hunter Walk. He's early Google, I think early YouTube actually, and he said that the only rationale for this type of deal is a company looks at a startup like Figma, which is eating into its market share. So just as a quick landscape, Adobe does a lot of creative design tools. I'm sure Jack's used all of them: Illustrator, Photoshop, After Effects, InDesign. But those are done in a more traditional file management version, right? You send each other files and you're like version 13, version 18, final version 20, right? So like very
desktop centric.
Yeah, desktop centric, file based. Figma, founded in 2012, didn't even have a product for the market until 2015, is web-based first. It's like Google Docs for Adobe products. And the entire concept being you want real-time collaboration. Multiplayer mode is what it's called. But what it really did was it opened the aperture of who can be involved in the design process. Jack, I'm sure we'll get into it, but basically if you have a multiplayer mode in a web-based, you can have the designer involved, the engineers involved, the client involved, product managers. I'm sure the CEO gets in there and drops his 2 cents. But before, if you did that, it was a complete disaster. You're sending around these files. But Figma basically has taken itself to a $400 million run rate, which will be by the end of this year. And the way we always reference him, but he's the OG, Ben Thompson talks about this deal, says basically Figma was creating the operating system for the design space. And well, I actually love for Jack to address that part. And then we can finish off the deal and then we get the love fest. So Jack, when he talks about, do you design primarily in Figma?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And when you hear the words operating system for design, that sounds like the gravity of the design world has gone from Adobe to Figma for, a lot of organizations. Would that be correct?
Yeah, for product design specifically, yes.
Okay. So what does that mean that the gravity moves to Figma though? It's like the Figma first is where it's the Schelling point now, right? It's where everybody congregates.
Yeah. So what you were saying about multiplayer mode, I forget where I saw this, but there was like a flow chart. I think there was from a whiteboard in early Figma days, which was like, can I share this design for feedback directly from in the app? Yes or no? And if the answer was no, the flow chart the arrow went back to the top. So it's like, until we figure out the solution to that problem, keep developing it. So when I started my design career, designing a website is the most insane process you can imagine. Like, you would design either in Photoshop or Illustrator, Photoshop a lot of the time, which is like the nuance between bitmap and vector design is a whole nother like hour-long conversation. But basically, Photoshop, you're designing by the pixel. So every pixel has to go where you say it's going to go. You write notes where they go. The different size devices, you would design different files for every different size of device, different breakpoints. You would build the file out vertically as long as it needs to go. All the different on-off states, like if a button, if a form doesn't complete, you need a new file to show that state. You would export them all as PDFs, and then you would like go to a meeting with a 400-page PDF, click through it on a projector and be like, now this is this is that.
Scroll up and down. Yeah.
And then the client would say, okay, here's the feedback. Maybe we'll annotate the PDF. So they're annotating a 400-page PDF. Then you take all that feedback back and you're like, that has to go from whoever was in the meeting to the designer that's working on this breakpoint and that. And like, I think even before Figma, there was a product called Sketch that I used for a couple of years probably before I switched over to Figma. That was essentially like the UI and the functionality in that software is very similar to what Figma does, but the way
only.
It was built was so different.
And it's Mac only.
So yeah, it's Mac only. You have to pay to use it.
It's owned by. Was that made by Apple, right?
No, no. It's called.
Okay.
I think it's like Sketch
company.
App. I think that's their own company.
Oh, got it.
And they basically, people were trying to get me to use Figma from Sketch before, and I was like, I've already paid for Sketch. I don't need to, and I wasn't doing client work at the time, so it didn't like make that much sense.
Plus, you'd have to like learn a new software again.
Yeah, and the killer feature for Figma was the in browser. So like, I think the Ben Thompson article explained this really eloquently. It's like they stripped it down to the metal, and I think what they mean by the operating system is it's like they were able to build all the functionality of a tool like Sketch in the browser, which means as a designer you can literally click a button in the top right hand corner of Figma, share design, and it goes out to a client or a collaborator or an engineer on your team. And then when a comment is made, you get an email, you resolve the comment, or you go back and forth in the file. Like the amount of
like Google
productivity.
Docs, like people have used Google Docs.
It's Google Docs, but Google Docs obviously text for design, which is actually insane, right? I just wanted, so we got the tweet that we mentioned was from Ben Gilbert from the Acquired podcast, and he was the one that talked about stripped it to the metal. And I think what he insinuated by that term was they went to the roots of first principles thinking of this, right? So I'll just read the Ben Thompson line. It's quite technical, but it speaks to the technology behind Figma and how they really thought about this from first principles. So they go, Figma, which was founded in 2012, made a bet on the browser and spent 4 years building V1. So not 3, 4 years. This including writing the editor in C++, cross-compiling it into JavaScript using ASM.js. I have literally no idea what it means. But what it may ultimately achieved was that the desktop web-based version had the memory performance that you'd get from like a Photoshop or approximating it, right? And there's a whole kind of platform or template called WebGL, which was only released in 2011. So this was like based on new technologies that came out at that time. And before I lose this thread, because Jack, I loved how Jack kind of explained the center of gravity. And so the old world was the Adobe world, right? You basically established the old InDesign 400-page PDF world. So you move to this collaborative world. Let me add this one thing from Hunter Walk. He said, basically the deal looks like this. How much of our market cap from Adobe are we willing to give up to save the rest of the company? Because it's so clear, and I think Jack's about to explain, as you move into the multiplayer mode first, it's going to be game over, right? Like that's going to be the next 30 years of design. Would that be the right assumption here?
I think yes, like the workflow that Figma has built is the future of design, but Figma is really only, this is like a markets question maybe, because it's only a sliver of the functionality of Adobe products. Like you can't produce in Figma what you can in After Effects or Premiere, or it's like 2D
or even Photoshop
product design, right?
Because like Photoshop, if you're doing like, again, I don't use either that much, but I've used them both like as an amateur. Like there's certain stuff you're still using for Photoshop, and I know Photoshop, Figma kind of even like use that as a selling point. They said like you should use the design tools you need, but the collaboration part, which I like Ben Thompson called it like the vector of like attack essentially, right? Like that's the new vector they were competing on, was collaboration first. So they said if you need to use Photoshop, that's great. Just bring it into Figma and you can use the functionality.
Like they had like a plugin ecosystem that they're building, right? No, Jack, you're 100% right that the actual functionality versus Adobe is not the same, but Bilal nailed Ben Thompson's entire thesis. He's like, if this is the center of where people are congregating, then people are just going to start adding apps, right? And like these tools.
And I would say like it's where the money is too. Within that stack is like product design is probably the biggest or the most profitable application of these creative tools versus like people making animations or like at the very, very high end, right? Like when Hollywood is using software, I'm not sure of the intricacies of what they use there, but there's like software that exists outside of Adobe that like Pixar would be using, for example. So a lot of Adobe's product suite, I feel like, is kind of in no man's land. It's like it's not the industry standard at the high end, but Figma is like Google products are designed in Figma, Microsoft products are designed in Figma. Every like technology company that you interact with, probably Apple uses Figma in their product stack to design stuff. Like it's everything, and it's like from college projects to trillion-dollar software companies are using Figma to design products. And then I think the collaboration is one thing, but it's also like there's nuance in the collaboration where it's even like how the files are stored, shared, all of the organization that exists within it, which isn't particularly sophisticated, but just the fact you can access it through a browser is crazy. Like the first agency I worked at was backed up by tapes, literal tapes. Like overnight, they would leave all their computers on, and then the server room, I don't even know what technology this was, but I remember going in there, I was like, what the because it felt like old then. But it's like every computer, every file on that computer is getting backed up 3 times on this like tape device. And then later on in my career, is like there's an agency server, which is like an absolute shit heap organization, like terribly awful, but you're just like version 13.92617. Like the designer, the only person that would ever be able to read that file is a designer that worked on it, or the only person that would even be able to find it. And then Figma just like, even for, I think, applications that people didn't see it being useful, like keynote presentations, for example, like even if you're designing a document where you're telling a story, it's so much more efficient to design something like that in Figma, because you can document it in real time, and then you can pull it up on your phone, send a link to somebody. Like you don't need to carry your same computer everywhere even. Like the fact that one example is like Adobe licenses if we're traveling and like Celia and I both bring our laptops, like I have to buy an Adobe license for another laptop to even access some of the files I have on Adobe. Whereas Figma, you just go figma.com, log into your account, everything you've ever worked on is there.
I think you bring up such a great point is like, this isn't, a lot of people say, oh, it's a cloud first solution. No, it's even beyond that, right? Because for example, everything you just said there, yeah, Adobe has cloud solutions, Creative Cloud, you upload your files, they keep everything up to date as much as possible, but you still have to use this crazy like nomenclature system, version 1, version 30, version 40, check on my Dropbox, check on my G Drive, right? It's just not, I mean, they have a product, Adobe has
They've
XD.
Tried. It's shit.
Have you tried it? So can you tell us about Adobe XD?
And actually, while you're pulling that up, Jack, you can start your rant here, but I did want to share while you're pulling up your tweet on this, because I think it's worth us documenting this. Sorry, give me 1 second. Because when I saw this live, I was cracking up.
This might just have to be meme of the week.
Adobe, yeah, this is basically meme of the week. Oh, sorry, could you see my screen? Yeah, so Jack Butcher reshared Adobe's announcement and just said enormous L in true internet guy fashion. But yeah, so let's expand on why it's an L.
Yeah, well, first of all, what were the comments? Did you get any replies telling you to like kick rocks? Like, what was the sentiment around that?
No, I think the only negative feedback I got was like massive W for the founders, and obviously that's true, right? Incredible. They made an amazing product. That's the only reason it's getting bought for $20 billion. Obviously, I'm not commenting on that, right? Fair play to them if that's the outcome that they wanted. Like, incredible.
Dylan
work.
Field, Evan Walls both own 10% of Figma, so they're worth $2 billion each.
Respect.
Dylan Field,
like amazing outcome.
If you're looking at the stock price.
Yeah.
But I've never seen, and Trung, your tweet was great on this, like there's no better community to meme a response to like news they don't like than the design community, right? All those memes are made in Figma. It's kind of a good meta.
This is the one Jack sent us. I mean, this isn't a difficult one, but it was just hilarious. There's some way better memes, which are like kind of like you could tell you use Figma for. But for the listeners, Tommy Mason tweets out, so Adobe is a welcoming Figma to their suite of creative tools. And it's that scene in Toy Story where the neighbor kid just destroys all the toys and makes them look like all monsters and mutants. Oh, dude, hilarious. But yeah, the memes, incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Memes are amazing. And like that community is... Obviously, they're the users of the thing, but I don't think this acquisition is based on like the hobbyist or even the professional freelance designer, right? The value of Figma at that scale comes from the fact it's like enterprise, it's like in the guts of all the biggest enterprises on the planet, and like the IP that's locked up in Figma is just... It's kind of difficult to evaluate that. Like people obviously like, oh, they paid X amount more than earnings, but it's like the switching cost from Figma at this point is so, it's like almost unfathomable. There is not another tool that does what it does right now. So you couldn't, I don't know. I don't see a way for people to move away from it as a tool, and it's locked in at like really significant scale in a lot of big businesses. So I understand why they paid that for it, and it's not a traditional deal in the sense of like, you know, this user is worth X. It's like, this is a tool that is like deeply interwoven in development of modern software. It's like almost a program. If you could acquire a programming language, what is that worth?
Oh, that's
it's more akin to that in my mind.
So could you tell us about Adobe XD, the Adobe version of this? Have you ever used it?
No.
Okay, you wouldn't even, if somebody sent you that, you wouldn't even answer them. Hey man, we're working with Adobe XD. You'd be like, please don't ever contact me again.
No, you're not going to get you're not going to get design talent that works in that. I'm sure there are a few people that are like very good at it that make a living based on the fact that they're one of the few. But one of the things that Adobe's just done over the years is like, they always used to be like, I think it was like £700 when I was growing up to have a like Adobe, like Photoshop was £700.
Oh yeah, you mean they sold it? They sold it like CDs, right?
It was like
incredibly.
Torrent,
yeah.
It's all torrents. That's what I'm saying.
Before they transitioned to so to credit to Adobe, they made a massive transition to subscription and crushed it, like 10x their market cap, and they're able to spend that market cap to acquire Figma. But I want to hear Jack keep talking about how much he hates Adobe products.
Well, I think they're they were in a similar position at a certain point in time, whereas like if you wanted to make X, you have to use Adobe products, right? And that's still true for certain things. Like,
well, the majority of things, if we're being honest, right? Like a lot of things are
comparable to Figma, yeah. Like video, yeah. It's hard to say exactly, but there's definitely people using Adobe at scale every day. They switched to the subscription product, and then they have like a cloud program that sits across all of the other stuff. So it's called, I think, Adobe Creative Cloud. And then that like manages the installation of all these things. You have like font subscriptions. It just like, it's an incredible business move, but also added like a shitload of complexity to how you use the software. And they're like notoriously buggy programs. You download a version of it and then it crashes, and it's like, oh, you need version 0.0021, get this update, get that update. So design community, that was like a component of most of the memes, was like, you know, Figma's gonna be this like, sorry, Adobe Figma has crashed and your file hasn't been saved, good luck. But in their announcement, they're talking about not changing anything for a number of years. But obviously at a certain point in time, my view is like the value of that software and the like inability to separate from it as part of the process. Like there's a huge amount of, you could hike up the price of Figma and you're not going to lose that many subscribers. It's like a Amazon Prime level, what's the word?
Lock-in?
Yeah, lock in, and like you can retain customers at a silly rate.
Oh, the churn,
like,
incredibly low churn, right?
Yeah, like all of my work is in Figma. It's like Dropbox, like a more extreme version of that. You know, like when you have a certain amount of files on Dropbox, it's like, I'll just keep paying it. Like I'm not going to.
How much are you paying right now?
I was going to say, how much is it compared to? Because you can have there's a free tier, right? Like I use.
There's a free tier until you have teams. So until you have like any project where you want another person to be able to, I don't even think that's true. It's like there are ways to collaborate on the free plan, but there are some features that once you want to like categorize projects in a folder for a team to share, then you start paying per user, I think. And it's not cheap. It's like for two people, I think it's $40-50 a month. So it gets pricey fast. And then there's obviously enterprise people with thousands and thousands of seats on that. And then the one thing I didn't mention in the last piece is like Adobe has tried to do like cloud file storage within their software, and it's just not as elegant as the Figma solution. And it's like breaking this might be something that's specific to me, but I've always worked with Adobe in a certain way. So when they introduce all these like new UX patterns that they're borrowing from somewhere else, it's like it just doesn't compute, and you're not able to take advantage of the new patterns that they build into it, because it's like, this is how it's always been, this is how I've always used it. And they also like 2 years ago, like they've changed all the UX in Photoshop, like really random stuff, like the key you would hold to scale an object. They changed the key. It's like, what and it's like muscle memory. There's no reason for you to do it. It's like clearly somebody's just gone in there and been like, yeah, we need to update it to this.
to streamline the shortcuts or something.
Oh man, and still now it's taken me like, even after 2 years, like I go in there and you switch between platforms, you're like, why did
similar
they do this?
is so you talked about before, I love some more information on this side, is like, so Figma obviously can't do everything. So what's Figma closest to? Is it InDesign or what is it?
Illustrator, I would say.
So it's closest to Illustrator.
I would say that entry level, like Figma is way better entry level product than Illustrator. Like Illustrator feels way more intimidating. Like to the hobby user, Illustrator is way more difficult than Figma, and that's, I think, Illustrator resembles more what it looked like when it was created, however long ago that was. Than Figma, I think, was inspired by Sketch, like the initial functionality, that it was basically the same program, just built closer to, in the browser, which unlocked so many more applications and like spurred the network effect in a different way than Sketch was ever able to do.
Bilal, hit him with some Creator Lab questions.
I was just going to ask, just a couple things from what you were saying there. I think it's worth calling out, kind of like, you already kind of were talking about what you don't like about Adobe, which I agree with. It's like very clunky in that way. But just like the way the pricing set up for Figma, obviously being completely collaborative first environment as well. Like even me as someone who works on like reviewing creative sometimes and seeing like designers will send me stuff and they'll be like, oh, look at this. And at first I was like, what the hell is this Figma thing? And then when I got used to it, I was like, oh, this is so much better than downloading all these images in Google Drive and like going through one by one. And then even just sharing on a Zoom call or something like that, it's just you're zooming in and out. You're kind of going into different parts of the canvas, which is pretty cool. Yeah. And then just the other kind of like business part of this is, I think Figma is an example of what's called like bottoms up SaaS. So other companies in that realm are like Slack, I think was a good example of that. Dropbox. And what that means is you get the guys at the bottom basically, or any employee, just a regular user starts using it and they like it so much that they get their teams involved. So it's not top down where you go and pitch the CTO or the CIO or whatever else it is, and you're like, hey, there's this Salesforce thing and you need to implement it across your whole organization. You just go in and start playing around with it and you see, oh, this is actually much better. So that's a kind of a bigger trend, especially in Silicon Valley SaaS startups. Go on.
That's a function of the pricing too, right? Like the
free tier.
You can just use it.
Exactly.
And the one thing that I wanted to mention that the point you were just making, Bilal, reminded me of is like, imagine like when I wanted to start design, like I had to figure out a way to get Photoshop, get Illustrator, like hustle to get it.
Pirate Bay.
Versus
figure it out, yeah.
Versus just go on Figma.com and be like, bang.
Yeah.
And like the amount of talent that is unlocked all over the world and like what it's done for the design community at large is just insane. Like
yeah, I mean, they wanted to democratize, let's just say they wanted to democratize design, right? And they did.
Yeah.
And also just say, you said design community, which I think is like, 89%, but then there's just the regular, like me using, I'm not really design community.
That's true.
And I'll people creating stuff for the Instagram and like stuff like that.
Well, this is like 50% of users engineers. Like this is like, it's not just designers.
Because they're doing like UI stuff.
Exactly, right?
And the other
everyone
one
is a designer, boys. Let's be honest.
Well, the other thing I was going to say is like Canva. Canva's probably a similar category of just like maybe not similar, but like in a way that is made for just regular people. Like I've used Canva and it's very, very easy. Like it's basically templates and you're editing stuff.
What's the difference between Canva and Figma?
Oh, Canva's like for doing like fucking birthday cards and shit like that.
Yeah.
You know?
But it's worth much more. It's worth $40 billion.
It's worth like 40 billion, yeah. But they basically...
For real? Did someone buy it for $1 billion recently?
No. It's worth 40. It's worth 40. Funny. It raised $1 billion.
And but I would say that's less. Like Figma is like more designer centric, I'd say. And like actual, like engineers, people using
product design
versus Canva is literally like they pitch themselves as, you need to do social media marketing, you need to create posts, you need to do your kids'
here's a template for this, here's that.
Exactly. And they just get designers create free stuff and then you can pay for the extra things. And I've like used it and it's very easy to use. It's like pretty simple. So I think those two have done a really good job of democratizing, just getting people to create stuff from scratch.
Yeah, it's like on the spectrum of difficulty, it's like Canva is the easiest. Figma comes along like after that. It's easy to use, but the things that you can build with it are infinitely more complex and nuanced. Yeah. And then Adobe is like more complicated, but the direct competitors to Figma are less capable of the complexity required to build the products, if that makes sense. So it's like, it's way harder to get upskilled in that software, but it's also more difficult to build the things that you could build in Figma, which is an easier tool to use.
Yeah,
Jack, how like go ahead, Bilal.
Go on. Oh, I was just going to say, the example you said earlier about it's going to be very difficult for another company just to clone what they're doing. Like the earlier, I think Trung, you mentioned it took them like 4 or 5 years of just developing the product before they even launched it or something like that. And I know, again, it's kind of like in Silicon Valley specifically, there's a few companies. Most of them don't do that, right? Like it's like launch and iterate. Like that's the old school way of doing it. But it's like Superhuman comes to mind. I know Kodo, who I've worked with, they did that for many years before it was even like public. So there is this thing of like, it's a bit of a big bet because you're like, I'm working on this for ages and we don't even know if people, you know, are going to want the thing that we need. And from my understanding, for the first 5 years, they might have been developing something completely different. It was not the product it is today. I think if it started in 2011, was it? I don't know what they were first doing, but I don't think it was the Figma of today until the last like 5 years or something. But yeah, go on, Trung. What were you going to say, Jack?
Well, actually, as you were mentioning it, there's a tweet, I forgot who did it, but really good insight. He's like, you couldn't just give somebody $20 billion and be like, hey, build me an Adobe competitor. It's like, there's something about software. It's an art, right? There's still that art element to it.
Actually, sorry, like, Trung, that was the idea that I was about to bring up, was Slack versus Figma. So like Slack got acquired, was it by Salesforce?
Yeah,
right.
But also bottoms
Microsoft,
up.
And then, yeah, so also bottoms up. And if you've never used Slack, which is probably not most of you, it's like
a messaging system.
Yeah, it's messaging, but it's got threads and it's got channels and stuff like that. So when I first saw it, I was like, okay, why is this better than GChat? Because I was so used to instant messaging. And then when you start using it, okay, this is much
disclaimer, former better. Google employee.
yeah.
Trying to pump GChat's bags.
The G bags, yeah. But I would say Microsoft Teams, which I've not used, but I've heard kind of killed it in a way, in terms of like their scale, because Microsoft has this
distribution, baby.
Distribution, and they can just create a clone essentially and like push that out. So I don't know the exact numbers for this, but I'm assuming creating a Figma is going to be a lot harder than cloning Slack. I could be completely wrong in that, but that's my assumption.
Yeah, I would say that's true.
Adobe tried.
But
Adobe tried.
Yeah, and I think what they have, like Figma kind of accomplishes both of those things. Like it has that Microsoft distribution example like exists for Figma organically. Like it just, because it's a superior product, just flowed into all of these organizations and is stuck there now. And I just can't imagine how you would get it out. Like,
you know what? CNBC actually had an amazing article exactly to your point. It actually involves Microsoft. So end of August, CNBC does a pretty long read. It kind of went mini viral and talked about, so Microsoft and Adobe have quite a close relationship in terms of how many licenses Microsoft pays Adobe. I bet they're one of the biggest customers for Adobe products. And the CNBC article basically said, well, there's actually a problem that's happening at Microsoft right now. So both the CEOs of, Satya Nadella, and then I forgot the Adobe CEO's name. He's also from India. They went to the same high school, actually. So they have this kind of, pretty gangster. They have kind of this, not like they're buddies, but that was just a nice, like, small fun fact. And the thing that happened was, apparently at Microsoft, everybody's using Figma. And Adobe has this massive relationship with Microsoft. So they're like, Microsoft and Adobe are like the seniors, execs are like, what's going on? It's like, we pay you guys so much money, but everybody's using Figma. And like, this is like a pretty big thing like a month ago. And then I remember reading that. I'm like, oh, that seems like a pretty significant like piece of reporting. And then sure enough, like 3 weeks later, this deal happened.
Yeah, I think like the programming language analogy, I think is a pretty good one, because it's like at a certain point, there's no, like the fluency and the way people have been trained. And like, if you want to work with the best product designers in the world, you have to let them use the tool that they work in. Like, you're not going to get the best out of people by like trying to send them to a product stack that they can't use. And there's not like, they're not comparable. You can't. Yeah, it's fascinating how.
What concerns do you have as a? So first of all, let's just establish. You love Figma. Do you love Figma?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
You love Figma. Okay. Well, let me ask 2 questions. What are the shortcomings of Figma from your experience, and what are your concerns about the Adobe deal?
I mean, Figma does exactly what it says it's going to do. There's not. Yeah, I wouldn't change.
You have no annoyance about Figma. Well, there's got to be a con.
Jack,
like,
are you worried it's going to start looking like this?
Yeah.
For the listeners, this is the meme we were referencing. Adobe Figma 2022 quit unexpectedly.
Yeah. Oh man, that gives me chill just looking at that, man. I hate when that happens.
Daryl Jin, that's a good one.
You lost mad work.
Yeah. So, I mean, Jack, something's wrong with Figma. Come on,
What's
bro.
a con? I mean, the pricing for the like small team stuff is expensive.
Okay.
Relative to like, I mean, they have no competition though. So how can you can charge what you want?
Adobe Photoshop because it's
like $70 a month to get the creative suite.
The creatives, but that includes like Adobe Audition.
That's everything.
Premiere.
That's everything.
Can you buy one? I think you can buy one.
I think
only,
you can.
right?
Yeah.
But that might be like 30, 40. It might be equivalent. I think Figma on its own might be a tiny bit more than just Photoshop per month, potentially. But the bet is that most people probably just get the creative suite. I'm assuming.
I imagine. Yeah. I imagine. So Photoshop's $20 a month. All apps is $55 a month.
Okay. So that's interesting because Figma is close to the all apps. So it's actually not
for a professional like team user,
yeah. But that's interesting, just as one use case, because I think if you were getting all the other things you need, like After Effects, you said, and the video stuff, and
I can't get rid of Adobe as much as I dislike a lot of the way it works. Like I still use it. Yeah.
Still use it, yeah. All right. So the question I have for you guys is really on the valuation, which has been kind of an interesting topic. I know Jack kind of gave his take earlier, but to kind of summarize it, $20 billion was it 50 times ARR?
50 times 2022 estimated ARR.
Estimated, so that for annualized revenue essentially, which again is a really high multiple in traditional terms, right? Like we've moved way below that, especially with the way the market is right now. However, as Jack said, you're not paying, this isn't a private equity deal where you're buying 50 like Airbnbs or something, right? This is like where you're just times it by a multiple. This is, completely one of a kind company and potentially, one of your biggest competitors, if not your biggest competitor for the future. So what do you guys think about the actual valuation of this? And I'd love both of your take on it.
I'll just say what you kind of mentioned is just like it's a hunter walk thing. You can't value this on traditional metrics. It's like Jack said, it's acquiring a programming language for design essentially. There's just no value you can put on that. And I mean, the deals that come up is Instagram getting acquired by Facebook, but like way before Instagram had even done anything, no monetization. Hunter Walk also brought up Cruise Automation. That was the AI self-driving startup that was acquired by $1 billion by GM. That was also similar logic of like how much of our market cap we're willing to give up to protect the rest in the case this other alternative reality happens. But I don't know. I suspect, Jack, that you're going to have a similar thought about the valuation. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think what I was saying earlier about how much value it creates is like, it's very hard to measure, but it is a lot. Like the thing that Bilal was mentioning, like when you're buying another, like a more traditional business, you kind of see how money moves from the asset you're buying all the way through, like property, you know how much it costs and how much it rents for and how much it makes every month. And Figma like goes on to create so much more value after you capture the money for the subscription, if that makes sense. Like people are building on the free plan, people are making software that creates hundreds of thousands, hundreds of millions of dollars of value on the back end. Not to mention it's like this workflow that's deeply embedded in all these organizations that are worth billions and billions of dollars. So I think it's like, I don't know how sophisticated the conversation was in trying to figure out that valuation, just like probably going up to a number where it's just like they can't say no to it.
But that's what the I can't remember who was one of the largest venture backers in Figma basically said, they gave us a number we couldn't say no to. It's like you just can't, you literally just couldn't say no to this number, right? It's like dude, it's not like so like what are the famous founders saying no numbers? It's like, okay, Zuck said no to $1 billion from Yahoo, right? And then Evan Spiegel said no to $3 billion from Facebook. I think it turns out once you start hitting double digits, it almost becomes impossible to say no to.
Post-economic money, as our friend Balaji would say.
So, and this is, again, Ben Thompson, who's just a go subscribe to Stratechery. He was talking about how, so there's $1 billion breakup fee. because there is antitrust concern in the sense of like, this is just, let's be honest, this is an anti-competitive move, right? It's like, Jack, this is no question.
Why else would you buy it? Like, why else does anybody buy anything?
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, isn't it a bit of a funny phrase? That, like,
no, but I mean, it's so anti-competitive in the sense of like, there's just nothing now. This Adobe is the game. There is no other game. This will be the end of it for the next century.
How long before they buy Canva?
No, that's the running joke, right?
That'll be the full trifecta there.
Actually, I don't even know if Ben Thompson wrote this, but the sentiment was basically this: $1 billion is the breakup fee. So if Adobe doesn't close this deal, which is expected to close within the next 6 to 12 months, I think they have to pay $1 billion to Figma. But the cynical side is, let's say that the deal gets blocked. That year where Figma is in kind of no man's land, like everybody is expecting that, they're going to cash out, they're about to buy the new house. They start designing everything for Adobe. If that deal gets blocked in a year from now, doesn't go forward, you literally just stymied Figma for a year. And you paid $1 billion to potentially, you're paying $1 billion basically stop your competitor.
10D chess.
So like there's two, I mean, I guess from Adobe's angle, it's a no-brainer move, right? It's like, this is why we talked about it. So their market cap dropped by almost the price of the deal.
24 billion. I saw on the day, 17%. I don't know if that number's changed.
Well, it's like admitting defeat in many ways, right? It's totally. Like, this is our last hand we can play.
Yeah. So like, they basically acknowledge that our entire business, well, the All In podcast did an amazing thing, obviously, on the valuation side, but there's like, Chamath basically said this was an admittance that if you're looking at our models now, like if you're an equity analyst and you're like, laying out our revenue lines, is like we're acknowledging that all of this is at risk.
It's really what it signals, right? It's not like when other companies are bought like a semi-competing company, but just like for example, just because I know it a bit better, like Google buying YouTube.
Yeah.
Right. Like you could say even Instagram was like, they're getting scared of Instagram. YouTube was like, they're not really doing video apart from Google Video at the time, which was not really anything.
Atrocious, yeah.
Yeah, atrocious, exactly. And so that was like, okay, they're already selling media. They're going to expand into that.
Figma's so much further along the path than Instagram or YouTube. It's like the monetization, like they're already at 400 million. And the ramp's been insane, right? Question, not for Jack, for Bilal Zaidi. Bilal, you've been holding out on us. You interviewed to work at Figma.
No, it wasn't an interview. No.
Okay. What happened?
I had a few chats with them.
Okay, so what year was this? What was that?
It was not that long. It was before the pandemic, I think 2019. So yeah, it was not like official. I wasn't like I was already self-employed. So without going into all the detail, I did speak to them a few times.
No, let's go into the details. Why? Okay,
no. I was basically eventually became like a pitch for my agency that I still run, and so my clients are basically like Figma, like they're the exact same mold. They're like VC backed startups, growing. They've got found product market fit, and they're trying to like expand. So that was the kind of conversation, and it was more of like do you want to just come work here? And I was like, no, I'm not really looking for that. But I was trying to secure the bag, which I didn't, because they wanted someone to come in full time. So yeah, I don't know if it would have, you look at these in hindsight and you're like, oh man, that would have been a nice potential payday. But at the same time, I was probably way too late realistically. It was probably like 2019 or 2018. I can't remember the exact date. But yeah, so not like I didn't go for a whole process or anything like that, but just had a good chat with the team.
All right. So not too many beans to spill.
Yeah, hopefully not. Yeah,
what was your attraction to the potential?
I just got introduced. One of my friends had moved there, and he was like, "Oh, the growth team are like really ramping up. They are trying to figure this stuff out, and you know about this stuff. Why don't you just chat to them?" And then when we had the first call, I was like, "Oh, the guy I spoke to was like really, really savvy," and I was like, "Okay, this is, pretty like cool company." The other people I'd worked with in the space, like startups, were all using Figma, and so I like had experience using it. So I was like, okay, they're probably gonna be a winner. Like it was kind of already by that point, you kind of know they're doing well. It's just a matter of how much more of a winner could it be. So like realistically, even if I did go for a job like that and go there full time, probably would have been a decent amount of money, but not like retirement forever, post-economic money, if that makes sense.
Hey, boys.
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say the massive blind spot that I've just looking something up.
Yeah.
That is driving Adobe subscription and revenue without anything like Figma in the product stack is YouTube. People editing YouTube videos.
This is a huge thing.
And making thumbnails for you. I mean, I'm reading this thing. Look at this. Well, this is one person's opinion, but the like my bias is like product design and, you know, Figma versus whatever else I would use. But when you think about the volume of videos that are getting edited for YouTube, and Premiere is probably the top product in that category, that in itself, I don't know, that seems like a very, very powerful trend to be the leader in. And I'm not sure, I don't know enough about the video landscape to know, I know there's Final Cut Apple makes, but I think Premiere is probably the market leader by a long leg.
Big leaders, yeah.
Absolutely monster. Like their pivot to SaaS it's incredible. Like
it's insane.
Yeah,
insane.
So like for all of Adobe's from the business side, just absolutely masterful. Let me just pull up the Adobe CEO's name because he's a legend. I think he 10x. The Adobe CEO's name is Shantanu Narayan. Legend.
He's killing it. Yeah.
So maybe maybe I've changed my opinion in 1 hour conversation because I forgot about YouTube. No, I mean, I didn't because it's like I'm looking at it from such a biased lens of like the thing that I do is really hard to do with Adobe, but you know, there's plenty of other applications of it, and some of them are like runaway levels of growth. And product design, it's like when you're in this like echo chamber of the stuff you do, product design feels like the biggest thing in the world, but editing videos and making shit for YouTube is like, man, this Adobe's running on millions of computers, and people like churning out cuts for YouTube. So
that's the thing. After Effects is insane, right? Like like previous episode, you guys remember GeoGuessr? Trevor Rainbow, the super TikToker, he does everything.
Map stuff, right? Yeah.
Everything in After Effects. He's like, I don't use TikTok's tool. Hit After Effects. That's the thing. It's like, it's easy to talk about. I mean, even for Jack, who's a designer by day, like Trung is a total spectator. I've done a ton of actually InDesign work in the past. It's awful. The experience is awful of like management, version control. Absolutely awful. I kind of wish I had done Figma, but I guess I don't need to. I've never touched Figma in my life. I feel like. Go ahead, Bill.
So I was also going to shout out in Jack's course, like the what's it called? Not build once.
How to visualize value.
How to visualize value, which I've actually gone through. That's kind of where I've learned more about Figma was through that. I'd used it before, but like you were really going into the tool and showing how simple it is, adding the grid lines, all this sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, and I remember you doing. I remember you just presenting your screen once for something. I can't remember what it was. And I was like, okay, this is why designers love this shit, because it's just like very intuitive.
It's a great piece of software.
Anything else on Figma? I think we did we almost did 40, 50 minutes on that, I think. So
yeah, I think that was great from a designer perspective. I hadn't heard
that point of view.
Yeah.
Awesome, man. All right, let's move on to our boys at Porsche, not Porsche IPO. Trung, I think it's your time to shine here, mate. I mean, let's give a little bit of a background. I mean, before we do the fun fact fan, maybe we do that after. But could you explain the relationship between VW and Porsche? Because I think there was a merger, but I was confused around
it's
who owns
very, very complex. So the fun fact fan actually is going to be a big part of it, but we don't have to get into that. So for the listeners, I pulled up the org chart for VW, Porsche. It's quite complicated. So the Porsche family has a corporation called Porsche SE. They own 50.7% of Volkswagen. Volkswagen owns Volkswagen the car, Audi, Bentley, Lamborghini, Bugatti, and a couple other brands. But Volkswagen also owns Porsche AG, which is the manufacturer of Porsche cars. So it's like super incestuous. The Porsche family owns 50% of Volkswagen, which owns all of Porsche, the manufacturer. So it's extremely complicated. So the numbers might, when I say that some of these follow, just keep in mind that we're not going to get into the gritty details of this because I will completely mess up the corporate structuring. But just know that the Porsche family owns a big chunk of VW, and VW owns all of the Porsche manufacturing of the cars.
That seems so unnecessarily complicated. I'm sure there's a reason why they're doing this.
Yeah, there's a massive I'll just tease it.
Involve the Cayman Islands or something?
Well, there's a big reason is that remember how important car manufacturing is to Germany. There's something known as a Volkswagen rule, where if you have 20% or more of a company, you basically have veto rights. And Lower Saxony in Germany, where they manufacture a lot of Volkswagen vehicles, that local government owns a big chunk of Volkswagen. So there's a lot of like national level machinations which is a national champion, right? Like Volkswagen is a $90 billion market cap company. They're one of the 2 or 3 biggest car producers in the world. They employ hundreds of thousands of people. So that's the complexity has to do with how important it is to the country.
Got it. Okay.
Let's talk about the IPO. Well, Jack, can you just give us a couple minutes here on why you love Porsche and where it ranks in the luxury car market?
Let's full screen this one. I want to see Jack's facial expressions.
Design giants, man. Incredible designers. Like, I think this is probably a pretty universally held belief in anybody who appreciates good product design. Like the 911 is a good example of a car that has not really changed. You know, they got it pretty much right when they first built it, and every iteration of it has just been like this slight iteration, but they've kept the DNA in it over all these years. And I think the driving experience has been prioritized for a very long time. You know, other brands have kind of let the market sway them in directions that are maybe displeasing to the super fan or the car aficionado, like the Mercedes of the world that just make like, I don't know, probably there's like 50 SKUs for Mercedes now, but Porsche still is like, we make a 911. You know, they've like over the last few years they've branched out a little bit. They got like Panamera, Cayenne.
The Cayenne SUV is one of the most successful new product launches in the past 2-3 decades. That probably doesn't surprise you for
Yeah, I believe that. Yeah, and they still, you know, it's probably under a dozen cars they have.
So this is for Jack. For the listeners, I pulled up a kind of the Porsche 911s through history. They all look the same.
Incredible. Yeah. Well, these aren't through history. These are different models. But
different models. Yeah, sorry.
Same idea. Celia bought me the experience day at the Atlanta.
We about to say she bought you the Porsche. I was like,
wow. No.
Need to up my birthday gift game.
Yeah. It's actually where they filmed the Avengers. You know, the Avengers headquarters in the films is the Porsche Experience Center in Atlanta.
Oh, in Atlanta.
Yeah, is this the same racing day thing you went on? Is this the same thing?
Yeah. They just superimposed the track with the lake. So that's a track out the back of the Avengers building. It's incredible. So anyway, building's amazing. The cars are incredible. And I actually am not incredibly well researched on the Porsche story, but just like from the outside of it, just
let me
appreciate.
Throw a mini wrench into the history. Jack,
there's going to be some absolutely repugnant connections.
Jack might want to close his ears here, but I mean, obviously, German car manufacturers, there's going to be a tie to Hitler, unfortunately.
Hugo Boss, is that what's going to happen?
Ferdinand Porsche, the scion of the entire car manufacturing empire, he designed the Beetle for Hitler, so that's unfortunate.
Trump's about to cancel Porsche. So
No, but the design of the 911 is based on that Beetle design. So to your point, listen, you could skewer any German company for during the 1940s, but let's get into this deal a little bit. So Porsche is going to list later this month. Its expected valuation is $80 to $90 billion. So it makes about $30 billion a year.
Wait. I thought it was 70 to 75 billion euros.
Yeah, well, that's on the low end. So if you look at the entire scale, it could get up to 90, depending on how they price it.
$12 billion in today's terms, because euro is No, I'm messing around. Just, you were doing the quick. No, I saw Trung's eyes.
No, but you actually know what's funny is when you see, when you used to see the conversions in magazines, it'd be like 1.2 difference. Now it's literally hilarious. It's like 75 billion euros, and then in brackets, $75 billion. Like, stop converting it.
But the quick side note, I just saw my friend this weekend who lives in Europe, and he was just in Italy, and he said a beer of Peroni was €1.50. And water was $2.50. Like everywhere he was going, it's just insane.
It's unreal,
the levels
right?
We're hitting right now. Yeah, back to your story.
Yeah, so Porsche. We'll get into this and about the luxury side, but Volkswagen is obviously a mass manufacturer of cars. So Porsche on its own is going to be valued as much as Volkswagen. So not surprising.
But so.
It's crazy. It's because of how difficult the corporate structure is that it's confusing. Like, wait, but all the value
so Porsche's earnings aren't accounted for fully in Volkswagen's.
It is, but Volkswagen is like, it's one of those situations where, like, when something's below book value, it's like Volkswagen as the asset is just like, it's just not the people looking at it like, oh wow, you're stripping out, like, this is the crown jewel, right?
So
it's the opposite of Figma.
Yeah. So, Trung, can I clarify that? In that chart you showed with Porsche, VW, and Porsche again, when you're saying the value of Porsche, are you talking about that bottom part of the Porsche?
Yeah, but the way that they're listing is going to be, it's like, it's confusing enough where when I tell you that Porsche is going to be worth the same as VW, you probably think, wait, hold on a second. How is this possible? How's that value not locked in? It's just because of this insane structure. So what's actually happening is they're listing 12.5% to the public non-voting shares, and that will give you the full valuation. It's expected to raise 10 to 15 billion. The reason Volkswagen is doing this, and again, Volkswagen is owned majority by the Porsche family. So there's a lot of confusion here. Just know that the reason they need this money is for the electric vehicle aspirations. That's why this is going down. And the other part of it that's semi-interesting is that VW and Porsche will be run by the same CEO, Oliver Bloom. So there seems to be a little bit of discounting by a lot of stock analysts that, like, the value of Porsche on its own is like, that's what we're going after. But because, like, these manufacturing wise, like, Volkswagen shares a lot of the same, like, bodies for Porsche, Lamborghini, right? It's like, there's a very tight relationship between Volkswagen manufacturing and the Porsche. And this is why it's so confusing. But I think what's interesting about it is, can they get that valuation for basically Ferrari? Because Ferrari has a 24% operating margin. Porsche has 18% operating margin. Typical Volkswagen cars have 10 or less. So, like, luxury vehicles, because you can charge a luxury price because of the brand, because of the performance, they're very good businesses. But the TLDR is basically, they want to spin this out. They think they can unlock a lot of value, but the market's like, well, actually, you have the same CEO. The actual shares you're given to the market have no voting rights. And then there's this insane family government involvement structure, right? So I think it's a super interesting public listing. Again, trust me when I say that Porsche will be valued as much as VW. I know it's confusing as hell, but it has to do with this crazy corporate structure. Happy to throw it to you guys for some thoughts.
I was just going to ask you how much, or like, how does that money flow to developing electric vehicles, and why, like, how am I going to phrase this? Like, you're saying they don't have the capital to throw at an electric vehicle program that they would like to grab up a certain degree of market share, I'm assuming, to compete against, like, a Tesla.
They need the big chunk of money, which is, in this case, will be 5 to 10 billion. Not all of it is going to be going to them in the public listing, but they will be using that money from the listing of this, of how much ever they own of Porsche, the manufacturer. Because again, insane corporate structure. But Volkswagen will be taking whatever funds they receive there, in my estimation, will be 5 to 10 billion, to really push on this EV front. And hopefully, whatever shares they retain, if the market values Porsche at same multiples as Ferrari, so Ferrari's at 35 times earnings right now, versus Porsche, which is about 20, I think, and then Volkswagen is 5 times. So, like, they're hoping they can unlock that, their remaining ownership, whatever it is in Porsche, will also increase significantly in value. So they're going for the whole value unlock to fund EVs, but it's extremely complicated.
One more question for you, Trung. Tesla's market expansion was, the play was to build a cheaper car, right? And I'm assuming Porsche electric vehicles are going to be 100 Gs at least. So I'm curious, how
Porsche,
people are responding to that idea.
Electric for VW.
Oh, okay. All right.
So
Completely
VW's
different.
ownership,
Porsche,
VW wants to take its share of Porsche, what they can raise in. So
got you. Okay.
To fund their program, right?
Yeah, VW's program.
Because they want to sell 30 grand electric cars, not 100 grand electric cars.
Exactly. So that makes a lot more sense. Yeah.
Got you. Okay.
Got it.
All right. Okay. Trung, do you want to round us out with this fun fact fan? VW being the most valuable company in the world for 2 days.
We'll go super quick here. So as mentioned earlier, Volkswagen has this little complex structure. It went private in 1960 after being a government manufacturer, but Lower Saxony in Germany, that locality has a 20% plus stake, or it did up into this 90s, 2000s era, because this is when it's the short squeeze for the ages. Like, we remember GameStop, right? When GameStop just flew through the roof.
This is before Wall Street bets too, right?
Yeah, this is before. So, but it'll make so much sense when I break it down. So what is a short squeeze? When a stock is shorted, you are borrowing shares from the market, you're selling them immediately, and then at a future date, you're hoping that the shares have dropped so you can reacquire those shares and then return them to the market, right? So being able to hold shares for the stock is critical to this. So keep in mind then what happens when you can't acquire shares. This is how short squeezes happen, because anybody that's short the stock's like, oh crap, I can't get the shares. And that means my short position can go to infinity because prices can go on forever, right? Like theoretically, it could go to infinity. So in a short squeeze, the worst case scenario is if there are no shares available in the market for you to close your position. So that's the nature of the short squeeze. And this is how it happened with Porsche and Volkswagen. It's insane. So remember this insane structure I just told you about, this corporate structure. So in 2005, Porsche is independent. Volkswagen's its own thing. Porsche, the family, starts buying up Volkswagen stock. So in 2006, they announced they own 25% of Volkswagen. So, but these are all German families, they all know each other, and they're just like, okay, this is a pretty big thing. But then the Porsche management is like, guys, we're not gonna do anything untoward. We're not gonna try to take over Volkswagen, which is much bigger than us. We're just buying stock in the market. We wanna make sure we have access to this 20% rule where we can also help veto, because we want to do this for the good of German car manufacturing. And over the next 2 years, obviously everything I said is untrue. They slowly build up a position to 43%, and also they have call options to own an additional 32%.
So where are they getting the money from for this?
They're going heavily in debt.
Okay.
Yeah. So they're issuing the personal family debt and also within this company itself. So this is where, as I mentioned earlier, the joke that Porsche was turning into a hedge fund. So like the CEO at the time was just super financial engineering. So they're making this massive play for Volkswagen. And this is actually why, to answer Jack's exact question. So Volkswagen has like 12 billion sitting on their balance sheet in early 2008. When you own 75% of the company, you get to roll their balance sheet into yours. So they're basically slowly buying it up and using all this debt to do it. And then they're like, we're just going to sweep that money, close our debt. So it's like a pretty savvy move they're about to pull off, right?
Wow, yeah.
So, but then it's 2008. What happens in September 2008? Lehman Brothers. So Lehman Brothers happens. We've already been in a recession actually at this point for a year. So that recession actually started in late 2007, even before Lehman happened. And the car market, total shits. When Lehman happened, GM took a bailout. I think Ford took a bailout. Chrysler, I think they all went bankrupt. One of the big three in the US did it. So people are looking at what's happening in the car market. Everybody's shorting the shit out of Volkswagen. So here's where the short comes in. Volkswagen, though, its price has been staying afloat because everybody assumes that Porsche is buying up a position and they're going to support it. So there's this massive disconnect. Everybody expects Volkswagen to go the way of the American car manufacturers. Recession is game over. but it's being boosted by Porsche. So Porsche announces, though, this is where it gets crazy. They announced to the market on, I think, October 28, 2008, they say, oh, by the way, this is our position. We own 43%. And we also have the options to own another 35%, which means we get the 75% unlock for the balance sheet. The market sees that. Everybody that's short Volkswagen is like, oh, shit. Because 75% of the stock ownership belongs to Porsche. Lower Saxony owns 20%, which means the free float of shares is only 5% of the company is out there. And when you get 5% of the shares out there, you can't get that stock back. So over a 2-day squeeze, the stock quintupled. And Volkswagen was valued at almost $400 billion. Number one company in the world for 2 days. Bigger than ExxonMobil at the time.
That's wild. Sorry, this is 2008, was it?
Yeah, 2008.
Damn.
And here's where the machinations get wild. Porsche, with that super overvalued stock, they're like, okay, short sellers, we'll sell you at $1,000 a share, which is 5 times what it was a week ago. We'll sell you 5% of the float. And so they profited from this trade, $5 to $10 billion. But they actually didn't get to close out their position with Volkswagen. Basically, the German government stepped in. They're like, we don't want Porsche owning Volkswagen, even though they're families. Like, Volkswagen is to us the most important player here. And basically, government decision, fiat, by 2012, Porsche wasn't able to take down its massive debt it did to build its position. And Volkswagen, to Bilal's original point, merged or acquired Porsche in 2012. There's a lot more to this details. Like, the scion of the Porsche family, like, was a crazy puppeteer in the background. But yeah, that's the story of Volkswagen being the most valuable company in the world for one day.
Wild. I'd never heard that before. Mental.
Yeah,
Time
dude.
for a thread, Trung.
Yeah.
For a thread. All right, I think that's a great way to finish up, mate. I think we hit our time as well. Anything else before we close out, boys?
No, that's amazing.
No,
well, Bilal, why don't you close out with the listeners, and I'm just typing something to you guys right now.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, well, thanks again for being there, everyone. We appreciate all the support and love. We got more for you coming every Wednesday. So make sure you're subscribed on all the platforms, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and we will see you next week.